Welcome to a Spiritual World podcast, a space where we explore the vastness within and around us, a place to remember that you are a spiritual world within a spiritual world, the mind within the mind of the all. Here, we journey beyond programming, past the pain, and into the true essence of our sovereignty. My name is Toriea, and my sole mission is for you to find the guru within and remember yourself as the creatrix of your world, embodying the power within you to build a life you love. As always, you're encouraged to go back to episode 1 for the full disclaimers on the terminology of mystic psychology. I am not a medical professional, and nothing shared in this podcast is intended to replace professional medical or mental health care. The term mystic psychology is not used in a clinical or medical context and has no connection to the medical field or industry. It is a spiritual and energetic framework rooted in the ancient wisdom and sciences of Hermeticism, intended to support self-exploration and inner awakening. If you are seeking medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment, please consult a licensed medical or mental health professional. Everything shared here is based on my own personal lived experiences and energetic perspectives, offered in the spirit of empowerment and remembrance. Please take what you need and leave the rest. I am honored to walk beside you as a channel, a guide, and a fellow traveler as we continue on this path together. All right, guys, welcome in to a spiritual world. I am your host, still Toriea. We're rebranding from Hermetically Speaking to a Spiritual World podcast. And I'm a spiritual world. You're a spiritual world. We're living in a spiritual world. And in this space, we uncover the mysticism in psychology, we bring about multidimensional healing, and activate the deep remembrance of your spiritual sovereignty. It's where we speak the unspeakable, decode the unseen, and remember who we truly are beneath all of that programming. And just a disclaimer, a heads up, I am recording in a different space of my house today, so there might be a little bit of different noises. My desk is set up and it doesn't have the soundproof mat. So we're going to roll with it and see how it goes. I like to have a little bit of freedom. But in today's episode, we're going to call it the Sacred Rebellion. We are diving into the spiritual roots of two heavily misunderstood diagnoses: borderline personality disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. So BPD and ODD. Now, we're not going to look at them as labels, right? We don't want to necessarily put labels on ourselves because then we become attached to them and we make them parts of our identity. And we don't want these to be parts of our identity because we want to be able to release them back into the universe. We want to thank them for their time with us. We want to thank them for how they served us. And then we want to be able to say, transform and transcend. And then we're also really going to focus on the symptoms of a deeper fracture. And of course, what it all leads to is a lot of times the soul contracts. And written in the nervous system are these symptoms and these diagnoses to awaken healers, rebels, and prophets. So we'll explore why these patterns emerge, how trauma distorts connection, and what it means to choose sovereignty over survival. This is a transmission for those who've been told that they are too much, too unstable, too rebellious, or have just always felt that way. When in reality, you were never meant to fit in to a broken world. You were meant to change it. So, let's begin. And we'll start off with, right off the bat, you might be wondering why I grouped BPD and ODD together in the same episode. Well, they are very personal to me. They are diagnoses that I received from a young age. And while I was misdiagnosed many, many times, I do understand that I have symptoms of different diagnoses, and these would be two of them. And I also think they really run in conjunction for me. Like anytime I think of my BPD, or it's not really my BPD, right? We're not attaching. So anytime I think of my BPD diagnosis is really where I want to say, it pairs with ODD. Like I can't think of one without the other. And it might be because maybe I was diagnosed with them around the same time, and that's maybe, something to work through in my own healing journey. However, I have found that there's like I said, a conjunction between the two. They cross the tracks for me. They cross each other's tracks. And at first glance, a lot of people, and maybe not, maybe other people recognize the similarities as well. They might seem like they're very different experiences. However, BPD is often seen as emotional volatility, sensitivity turned all the way up. And ODD is seen as defiance, resistance turned into rebellion. However, when I look deeper, energetically, spiritually, and through the lens of trauma, they are connected for me at the root. Both disorders are reactions to powerlessness. Both are expressions of a fragmented self trying to survive in environments that were unsafe, invalidating, or controlling. And both carry this one deep, often invisible pattern: a deep distrust of others, and an even deeper longing to be loved without conditions. And I also want to bring in the fact, like we talked about, I just briefly stated that, unsafe, invalidating, or controlling. However, I also think that, at least in my reflection of BPD and ODD and the symptoms that I have noticed, that I then invoked controlling symptoms of my own. Now, this is just for me, again, but I'm hoping that it helps others understand and relate. And that control, of course, kind of goes hand in hand when you don't trust other people, right? A deep distrust of others, for me, invokes my desire to control everything around me because I don't trust anything around me. And I'm speaking in a past tense in a sense. I'm just kind of giving real life examples. And in BPD, this kind of distrust shows up as abandonment fear, unstable identity, and intense emotional swings. While in ODD, it shows up as a refusal, a resistance, and a refusal to be controlled, even if that control is gentle. Even if it's trying to be soothing and nurturing, that distrust prevents that connection of believing that someone is really trying to help you for your own good and not to serve their own purposes. And underneath them both is a child, a part of you, a protector who never felt safe enough to actually soften into trusting their environment or individuals within their environment again. And so who decided, that when they couldn't feel into this softness, who decided, if I can't be free and loved, I'll choose rebellion. I'll protect myself from needing anyone ever again. So I paired them because together they show us a full arc of fragmentation and sovereignty. Like I said, for me, they kind of go hand in hand. My emotional swings are kind of they were my lash outs. They were, me resisting other people's control. And I was a lot of times looked at as ODD because I didn't allow people to get close to me, because I had these intense emotional swings, because I felt like I was unheard. I felt like I wasn't listened to. I felt like the adults in my life were, I'm the adult and I said so. I'm the adult and you do what I say. I'm the adult and I know better. And nobody knows better for me than I know better for me, even at that age. You know what I mean? And I think that that's where we lack in a lot of understanding, is that, and I'm not saying children are completely developed. I'm not saying I knew everything back then. However, I knew that I was in pain. I knew that I was sad. I knew that I didn't trust people, and the people around me that they couldn't face that I couldn't trust them because they couldn't face themselves, right? So it really depends on what environment you're in. So, and like I said, this podcast feels like it's kind of breaking apart and coming back together, and that's how this episode kind of feels. Not scattered, but I don't know, I guess I'm in this like kind of vortex where it's like, oh my gosh, what's it all going to be? How's it going to be? What's going to, so I'm trying to like kind of release all of that and just really flow through this. So you guys just kind of stick with me, and I hope that you guys can take something with you. And so like I said, I paired them together
to show this full arc of fragmentation. And to me, ultimately, and I believe I touch on this later on in the episode, but ultimately these are two symptoms of CPTSD, right? Like when you have CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it is built over time. It is built over multiple traumatic instances, multiple distressful situations that the nervous system gets overloaded with, your brain gets overloaded with. And so all of these different symptoms start to appear, right? Like if you have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from abandonment issues, then that's going to make you never want to trust people again or get close to people again, and have those unstable emotions and those unstable identities and the lack of the ability to sustain long-term relationships, right? And of course you're not going to want to listen to anybody because you don't trust anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a societal paradigm, a governmental paradigm, or a familial paradigm. If you have this if this innate ability in you was formed to distrust, I think that sometimes we forget that there's sovereignty in that. And that's where also that full arc of fragmentation and sovereignty come, because the broken systems don't serve us. So why should we listen to them, right? I'm not saying hurt anybody. I'm not saying go out and I don't believe in rioting or anything like that. I believe that there are peaceful ways, and I know that kind of sounds like some people are like, please, yeah, you got to create the chaos. I've just had enough chaos in my life, and I did have chaos, and I tried revenge, and I tried vengeance, and I tried resentment, and none of them, they fueled me, but they didn't fuel me in the way that my peace and my sovereignty fuel me now. And it took me going through those to find that. So it's a process for everyone. So, like I said, these come from the wound of needing love, however, not trusting it, not trusting that they're worthy, not opening themselves up to love because they don't know how to. They don't even know that they're cut off from love because nobody teaches children or really anybody what emotional maturity is, or even how to handle emotions or what emotions are, right? I didn't know the difference between envy and jealousy until I was 36 years old. Right? And I also thought that they were oh my gosh, nobody wants to, please. Those are both really, really beautiful words. And so what ends up happening is the rebellion that rises when the soul refuses to be caged one more time kind of lashes out in these symptoms and these over-encompassing diagnoses. And this is how the inner split plays out. And this is how we begin to bring it back into our wholeness. So, for me, these two energies, BPD and ODD, intertwined long before I ever had names for them. I shouldn't say super long because the diagnoses didn't come ridiculously long after. However, the symptoms obviously started before the diagnoses, which duh. I was around 12 years old when I made a very specific soul contract with my higher self. And I remember it still to this day. My higher self has not let me forget it. My ego has not let me forget it because my ego probably thinks that this is one of our downfall turning points. And it very well could have been. And like I said, it was ingrained in me. It lived in my bones even before I understood what I was doing on an etheric or alchemical level when I made this soul contract with myself. And I remember being 12 years old and I declared to myself, no one else, me, myself, and I for the rest of my life, I would never trust anyone again. And I meant it with every part of my being. I had no one left that I could trust, and it was just going to be me, myself, and I. And I remember my higher self literally telling me, you're not grieving properly. And me saying back to my higher self, yeah, I know, but what am I supposed to do about it? I didn't have the language to go to the one parent that I had, the one maternal or biological parent that I had left and say, I'm not grieving properly. I didn't have that language. I knew it. I understood what my higher self was telling me. However, I didn't have a solution because I also didn't trust anyone to help me through this struggle because they were already tearing me apart and there was just so much chaos already. The distrust and the illusions had been shattered at that point, and there wasn't any going back for me. I had just lost my dad, and in the aftermath, the majority of the significant adults in my life, the ones who should have held me, chose my inheritance and my dad's belongings and their own survival mechanisms over my well-being. And it's not to say that some, didn't try intermittently, like even ones that hurt me might have tried to love me, but the hurt was already done. The betrayal was already there. So why did I want their love? You know what I mean? Like I just cut myself off to everything. And I had already kind of planned, like the moment that I found out that my dad had passed, there was just a switch. Like I just there was a switch that went off. You'll hear me talk about it. It was like a light switch from light to dark, and my entire world changed. And so they and myself, everything that I knew started to disappear into the chaos. Deception, betrayal, and destruction swallowed whatever was left of me. And my dad died physically and activated a spiritual death within and all around me, taking what I thought love was with it. And sometimes this stuff is hard for me to talk about because it's like, damn, I'm still, like, I've worked through a lot of it, but there's still, like, you could probably hear it in my voice, and I misplace my words because it's like, do I really want to talk about this? But I do, because I know that people can relate. I know that it can help others. I know that it has helped me working through this and coming to the awareness that I have. And so I adapted at that age, right? I was 12. My dad died right before I was 11. So it took a little while for all this to set in, but I began to adapt. And by adapting, I mean, I started to harden. I remember mentally building walls in my psyche, like building walls of like brick and mortar, and like just visually like seeing myself do it around my spirit and around my body and in my mind. And then as I got older, with more trauma that occurred, I would build new walls around that brick wall until finally, whenever I collided with my twin flame, and I built like this iron wall around me, and then the psychosis made me rip every single wall down. So that was fun. Anyways, I didn't trust anyone. I wouldn't take direction from anyone. And from as far as I could remember, I could see and feel unconscious motivation behind adults' actions and words. So this made it even more difficult because I could see their behaviors and why they were doing what they were doing. And I didn't quite understand it because it's like, you're making this decision out of this wound or out of this, you know what I mean? And it's kind of hard to explain because while I didn't have the ability to like be like, oh, I'm not grieving properly, or maybe I didn't want to deal with it then. I'm not sure. There's just a lot of language I lack in understanding. Like I understand that I had gifts when I was that age that I didn't know that I had. Like I thought it was normal to be able to understand where people's actions and words were coming from. I thought like, like if my mom did something and I I didn't have the language for inner child at the time, but I knew that it wasn't necessarily maybe like the most adult behavior. Like I, had more expectations than that, but I also, I'm like, I'm the child, I'm supposed to act that way. Why are, you know what I mean? That kind of concept. And, so I was really, really disappointed when when my maturity felt like it was higher than theirs. But trust me, it wasn't, because I was lashing out in a lot of ways too. I could see it. I could see where they were coming from, and I didn't have the language like I do now. And I'm so grateful for the language I have now, because I can understand the inner child, and I can understand the inner adolescent, and I can understand that these were wounded parts of them that they didn't really see either. But I could see them, which created a lot of chaos, because since I could see it, they couldn't see it. I didn't understand how they couldn't see it. So I started the loop of insanity from a very young age of trying to get them to see their own shit, and it didn't work out very well. Let's put it that way. It was just a lot of headbutting and all of that. And of course, I didn't even want to look at myself because I didn't trust anybody, right? Like I felt like everybody else's criticism was because I caught them in shit and because of, their own selfishness and things like that. So I'm kind of rambling there. And so let me find my place again. And I feel like I'm starting this podcast all over again. I'm like, oh, let me find I feel like this is me in the earlier episodes. Oh my goodness. And so, yeah, so I could feel unconscious motivation. I definitely had telepathy. I knew things that only telepathy transmitted to me, that my higher self allowed me to know. Some of it was to break me more. Some of it were truths that were so awful to hear. However, they set me free, and understanding like that I needed to break these bonds between myself and these adults. I had to stop idolizing. I had to stop the codependency, and it took me a long time to do it. And I did it in a very destructive manner when I initially did it. But yes. So let's see here. Okay, so we're going to jump to the paradox. The paradox here is that even though I forged a solo path of me, myself, and I being this fiercely independent, rebellious, and emotionally volatile being, the one thing I really longed for was love. I always wanted to find love. I always wanted to give love, except for to the people that hurt me. They were the exception. And it's not to say that other people were not casualties. I definitely hurt people that I love, and have been doing living amends since then, and we have great relationships. But you know, it wasn't a straight line or just black and white. So while my intentions were to punish the ones that had hurt me and love the ones that didn't, everything became mixed, and it, you know, I had to admit that to get where I am today. And so while I craved nurturance and I craved connection, I didn't trust it enough to receive it, or that I had been worthy of it, right? I had this deep abandonment wound, basically like succumbing me to being an orphan, where I just felt completely detached from any parent figure, whether it was biological or any other form that I had known. So, and because I didn't know really what those words meant anymore, nurturance, connection, even love, no one really stayed long enough to help me feel them. And I didn't want them to, right? And nobody really modeled them. At least it wasn't the people I wanted to. And I didn't even know who I wanted to, right? Like, it's really hard to have trauma happen as a kid and as an adolescent, because it's like you want help, but the people that you're stuck with, you don't want them to help. And it's really nothing personal against them. It's just they can't help. They're not the ones to help pull you out of the mud. And, you know, I've had circumstances where, like, my siblings have not been able to understand why I couldn't get better, and I put that in air quotes, like, get better for them or for my mom or, you know, just for any of my family members. And, you know, it didn't work out that way. I had other people outside of the family dynamics activate me into healing, and that's how my spirit did it. That's how my higher self led me and guided me. And, you know, my family and I have different pains and different experiences. And I think that's a part of it, is that the people that were able to activate my healing, we had the same type of pain. We understood the same levels of devastation and rock bottoms and self-harm or self-hatred or shame, regret, all of those things. And yet, thank everything, God, karma, whatever you want to say, that my siblings didn't have that type of pain. You know what I mean? Because I wouldn't want that. So anyways, I ended up chasing everything down and burning it all at the same time in my life. I rebelled against everything and still felt abandoned. So this is where I'm sure I definitely could have been seen as this ODD and BPD. And I wore the armor and I still bled underneath of it. That soul contract, the one that said no one will ever get that close again, it ruled my life for years, until my Saturn return started knocking down my door, which was right around the cusp of my 28th birthday or 28th year. And slowly, that's when everything began to crack. So from like the time I was 12 until I was 28, I lived in this type of chaos. And it wasn't And the Saturn return wasn't necessarily punishment. It was an invitation. It was the universe saying, it's time to come home to myself. It's time to remember what love actually feels like. It's time to know the truth. It's time to be you, love you, not as you were shown before, but to reparent yourself and do all of these things that I did in the psychosis and since then. And that's when I started realizing that what I called strength was really survival, and what I called independence was really fragmentation. And the rebellion wasn't wrong, it just needed somewhere safe to land. And that's when the psychosis, my higher self, and the mantis and ascended master frequencies began mirroring me. They began mirroring the me, myself, and I back to me, and basically like propelled me and forced me into a timeline where the whole me, myself, and I concept was used to transform me. So me, myself, and I was totally used to tear myself down to the rock bottom pits of hell and purgatory. And then it was me, myself, and I that climbed back out of it. And no one was going to do it for me as much as I wanted people to do it for me back then. No one was going to dig me out of the diseased thinking and the actions that I had buried myself in for years. And that's what identifying these diagnoses that I have had for all too many years of familiarity with and dissecting their symptoms is so very important to me. It has been a big part of my path. And so, it might be even just a small portion of yours. So I'm going to zoom back out here for a minute, back to the actual topic of the podcast. Not that my personal experience isn't, eventful and helpful, but these diagnoses, the BPD, the ODD, the CPTSD, anxiety, all of them, they are obvious indicators that someone has lived in an unsafe environment. That part's clear. But what if they're not just that? What if these symptoms are also signals of a nervous system that's been wrecked by overstimulation, betrayal, inconsistency, and unmet needs? And I would like to put like one of my nervousnesses in episodes like this when I talk about my past is because I'm not where my past is anymore, but neither is my family. Like, I sometimes feel bad if I even mention the unhealthiness and the volatility that my mom and I had, because we're not that anymore. Like, my mom is one of my best friends. She is on a healing journey. She is on her own journey, and she is phenomenal. And, she had me, she birthed me into this life for me to experience the things that I chose to experience and for me to become who I have today. And we had to go through that to get where both of us are. So I think I get really nervous because she very well probably will listen to these, and or anybody that personally knows me, like, I want it to be known that that is not where we are anymore. And I just get nervous about that, right? Like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. And it's because I used to live in the world where it's all I talked about. I talked about my pain. I trauma bombed. I, told everybody what my mom and I went through and what me and the rest of my family members went through and things like that. And now when I speak on it, it's not because I'm trying to shame, blame, run away, or resentment or anything like that. I'm trying to give a very realistic understanding of where I have been, so that it is relatable. And just because, like I said, my goal is to be of service and help here and hope that somebody gets something out of it. And so, right, we're going back to what if they are signals, right? Overstimulation, betrayal, inconsistency, and unmet needs. And what if these patterns aren't just biological or environmental? What if they create like this snap, right? Like, sorry, that was me snapping my fingers against the desk. What if they create this snap within our psyches that creates more and more multi-dimensions? What if your rage, your shutdowns, your refusal to follow rules, your inability to stay in one place, or your one identity aren't flaws or disorders? They are codes, and they are codes pointing you to your unique path of healing, evolution, and personal power. What if the symptoms aren't something to fix, but something to unpack, right? Like, that's kind of like, how can I unpack these symptoms? What can I understand about them? How can I get to know them? These symptoms are parts of me, and they're sometimes their own beings within me that feel parasitic. feel controlling. Like, I want them gone. I hate it. And I've definitely had that. And that's when you know they no longer serve you. And so this pack that we're unpacking, we want to sort through it. We want to sit with it. We want to understand it layer by layer until we begin to see the intelligence underneath of the dysfunction, right? Because here's what I have found. As you start to decode your symptoms, as you track them back to their source, whether that source is trauma, ancestral imprinting, spiritual contracts, or collective programming, you start to grow. And you don't grow in spite of the symptoms. You grow through them, with them, until they are no longer reactions, but instead they blossom into tools that you can use. Rage ends up becoming a boundary, right? Because rage is so powerful. It is so strong. However, used in the wrong energy, it can do a lot of harm to yourself and to others. And so instead, being able to transform rage into boundaries and having those sustainable boundary lines and kind of patterning within you that serves you instead of completely burning everything around you, right? Like, I used to feel like Carrie from the movie Carrie. Like, that's how I felt, like, about the world and everything. And instead, I am at peace today, and I get to feel that I have boundaries that I can clear. Like, no is a full sentence, and I don't need to explain myself. And, I don't have to just use the word no. I can express how I feel without infringing on somebody else's rights or their own feelings or anything like that. So rage becomes your boundary. Avoidance becomes your compass for false alignment. And defiance becomes your sacred discernment. And what once wrecked your nervous system becomes the very reason you learn how to heal it. Because it's never just about what happened to you. It's about what it awakened in you. This is where healing meets evolution. And this is where the multidimensional self begins to remember who it is beneath all of the noise and all of the chaos. I have received more diagnoses than I can count, honestly. It really just depended on which doctor I saw, what time of the year it was, which textbook they were pulling from at the time, maybe which medicines they had contracts with, who knows. And some of the worst ones came before PTSD even had a proper seat at the table. And there was a time when CPTSD wasn't recognized in most mental health spaces. So instead, I got the above labels, like two of the ones that we were talking about today. BPD, depression, anxiety, mood disorder, dissociation, ODD, and a long list of acronyms that never really saw me and what I was going through. And over time, I started to realize something. All these diagnoses were just fragments. They were highlighted symptoms of one core wound, complex PTSD. And of course, that was later confirmed once I started walking my path and I was able to align myself with the right professionals. And that has been the lens that I understand moving forward. I think the majority of society probably has PTSD in some shape or form. I think that it's riddled in our bones. I think it's riddled in our DNA because of how our society is set up, and that it's set up for growth, but only in very limited ways. Like, we have to grow in a specific framework. And I think that creates a lot of chaos, and I think it creates a lot of disillusionment, and it doesn't create from creativity and necessarily expansion, right? And I've talked a little bit about it on different episodes on different subjects. And the first one that comes to mind is like the medical industry, right? Like, what if we're dealing with a situation where the medical industry doesn't want to admit that they can cure cancer because they're so afraid that they're going to run out of money if they cure people with cancer? Like, the reality of it is, dude, why don't you just cure cancer and then see what you expand to after that? Instead of, like, they don't trust the process. They don't trust the spiritual evolution. They don't trust, that they're always going to be taken care of. And I think that comes from a society that we have built that, the way that we are deserving or determine worth, right? Like, so complex PTSD, it's everywhere. And that's the energy that I work with for myself and in the healing spaces that I hold for others. So if you've been drowning in diagnostic language, just know that you are not alone and you have full permission to reclaim your experience on your own terms. And so I want to, like I said, kind of dive a little bit more into the DSM-5 clinical definitions or bullet points of what BPD and ODD are. So BPD is the frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, real or imagined, which is the inability to handle long-term relationships and long-term emotions, unstable relationships, the idealization into the devaluation, identity disturbance, shifting the self-image, the goals, the values, right? Like I could see this so much in myself with every time that I dyed my hair, and every time that I wanted a new piercing, and every time that I, changed something about my life, because I had to shift who I was because I didn't know who I was, and who I was I didn't like. And with every person or part of me that came alive as my dominant character at the time, when we would fuck up, we would just, let's switch. Let's be something different, right? Let's be someone new. Impulsivity, right? Substance abuse, reckless sex, binge spending, binge eating. The list goes on and on when it comes to that. And recurrent suicidality and self-harm, and chronic emptiness. And that comes from, the credit goes to APA 2013 on that one. And then same for the ODD, which the bullet points I have under that are angry and irritable mood, frequent temper outbursts, argumentative and defiant behavior. It refuses rules, annoys deliberately, and vindictiveness. Spiteful at least twice in 6 months is the timeline that they have there. ODD, they say, is typically diagnosed in kids. However, it can linger into adulthood. And I don't, it's an infinite reality. I don't necessarily think that any one diagnosis should be, grouped to just children in some regards. I know plenty of adults that flip the middle finger up in the air to a lot of authority in any shape or form. So yeah, my heart says a little ODD isn't bad. It's a good thing, right? Because we're in some really chaotic and trying times. But again, even with these symptoms, we can have these symptoms and they can come out in ways of peace when we're aware of them, right? Like at least not hurting others, and definitely not hurting yourself. We can find outlets, especially once you're aware of these things. It might even be, some people might feel it is your responsibility to do so. So here's where it gets a little spicy. We've got some research to suggest that these disorders actually might be evolutionary adaptations. Look at that. Maybe they're spiritual and etherical and they're multidimensional. So BPD as hypervigilance. There was a study where women with BPD ancestors were more likely to survive childhood trauma by developing acute social threat detection. And that was a study by someone named Linehan in 1993. And the translation for that study in short terms is, your abandonment radar isn't broken, it's honed by generational survival. ODD as anti-oppression coding. So the study was out of the Journal of Psychology in 2018. Kids with ODD show higher creativity and resistance to peer pressure. Translation, your defiance might be hardwired dissent against corrupt systems, right? Like we know this education system is no longer serving our children. It hasn't been. They've been dumbing them down for years, right? Like, so the ones that are like kind of bucking it are like, this is dumb, this doesn't work for me, and nobody's really listening to them. They're getting labeled as ADHD or rebellious, or they get sent to night school or suspended, all of those things. And then there is the neurodivergence overlap. And NCBI from 2020 stated that 40% of BPD patients also meet ADHD criteria. Chaos is not pathology. It is a different operating system, right? A lot of people have heard chaos magic, right? Like chaos is the breakdown of what is no longer serving. Chaos is how to destruct and pave new pathways, things like that. And, this 40% of BPD patients also meet ADHD. This really just comes into play that all of these symptoms from every diagnosis across the board is going to be interchangeable, right? You'll have 10 different diagnoses with 10 different symptoms, and then two symptoms from each one of those will cross over, or 3 or 4, and you just have this giant spider web of, I guess the term is neurodivergence now. I don't know if that's right, because I know that like neurodivergence is like a specific category of people that call themselves neurodivergents. So I don't really know how I would over encompass that in better language at this time. So anyways, when the DSM or anybody calls you disordered, remember the etymology of disorder, dis-ease, all of those things too. That was in a previous episode. But anyways, science itself says you might just be overclocked for revolution. Also, I put this twice, or I'm saying it twice, I guess. It is very important and symbolic that you understand the etymology of the words disorder and dis-ease, because the baseline for those types of things is very important to understand and be able to grow out of. There's a lot of ums in this episode. Not very happy about myself with this. It'll be okay though. Funny. You guys will forgive me, right? So, what if these studies are just secular confirmations of what mystics have always known? That the wounded are often seers, and let's dissolve the lab coats and step into the temple, right? Like, we're going to take off our mystic psychology lab coats and we're going to step into the temple of the Hierophant and the priestess, and we're going to go down into the wells. What if BPD and ODD are sacred contracts? Agreements written in the language of the nervous system that awaken the healer, the rebel, or the prophet within? What if your rebellion is not random? What if it's written in the karmic blueprint of your soul role in this lifetime? I have had symptoms of ADHD or ADD. I don't even know if they're the same anymore. I've lost track. Pretty much all of my life, like since my dad passed away, I have had those symptoms. However, no matter what doctor I went to, that is the one diagnosis that I never received. And my understanding of it now, when, I was really trying to understand that with my higher self, was because if I had received that diagnosis, I would have made it my identity and I would have been on medicine that I necessarily would have never felt like I needed to lose. It was the one diagnosis that I would have looked at as, okay, it's part of me, everybody is it, da-da-da-da. But the rest of these I fight. So that is a soul contract to me. You know what I mean? I chose the diagnoses that I have received in some way, shape, or form because of their symptoms, and their symptoms they have definitely weighed me down, but everything is a blessing and a curse. So they are also able to lift me up, and that they have as I have sorted through them. Every trigger is a key to a new doorway. So, BPD's fear of abandonment hurts, yes. ODD's rage at authority burns, absolutely. The way you ghost jobs, lovers, even your own goals. It feels like self-sabotage. However, what if in those moments, these are symptoms of your soul's brutal honesty trying to speak through to you, and before we really understood that we were on these spiritual journeys, we didn't know how to listen or understand. We would just ignore our soul. We would ignore our intuition. We would ignore our gut for what we were supposed to do. And these kind of outbursts and things like that, they became a refusal to fake commitment, just even for a brief moment. And to perform stability, when your spirit craves metamorphosis. So nature doesn't apologize for hurricanes or molting snakes. So why do we pathologize the storm inside of us? A guru says, find your purpose and cling to it. But what if your purpose is reincarnating yourself every 6 months? Think about it. The Buddha left his kingdom. The phoenix burns itself alive. And quantum particles exist in multiple states until they are observed. So you're not flaky, you're quantum, and your failure to commit It might be your soul refusing to be pinned down by 3D illusions of success and waiting for the right times, the right moments, and the right soul contracts. Or maybe we're all just traumatized, because both can absolutely be true. Your ODD isn't just I hate rules. It's holy rage against systems that tried to cage you. It's boundary radar for inauthenticity, and it is sacred ADHD that your spirit demands novelty because you're here to experience everything. But the trap is glorifying chaos as enlightenment. The real work is honoring your chaos while asking, is this fear or freedom? Am I transcending or just running? You don't have to fix yourself to be spiritual. Your BPD isn't bad or good. It's data. Your ODD isn't wrong. It's intel. The goal isn't to heal into some Zen zombie. At least not everybody's. That is some people's paths, and I don't mean Zen zombie in a bad way in that case. And I don't mean it in a bad way anyway. It's just good terminology here. But to dance with your shadows until they become lanterns, right? Like, we live in a world of duality for a reason. To be able to walk through both realms simultaneously, and one no longer feel heavier than the other in a sense, right? But we're also here to transmute the shadow into the light. Both exist. We have to work with what we're given in this time frame of the yugas. And so try this mantra. I am not afraid of commitment. I am selective with my surrender. Because in reality is, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're a warp drive in a world of horse carriages. And now we're going to take it to another level where we're going to get brutally honest that these labels, BPD, ODD, PTSD, ADHD, all the different ones, right? Like, these are the most familiar ones to me, but there's a million of them. They can become cages. I talked about this at the beginning of the episodes. And I probably talked about it in more than one episode. We stitch them into our skin like tattoos. We say, I'm unstable. I have ADHD. I am defiant. I am broken. And suddenly every emotion, every reaction, it gets filtered through a diagnosis instead of your own divinity. I have spent years, there were specifically 2 years where I just lived that I was PTSD. And since then, I've spent even more years saying that I can't connect deeply because it's the BPD. And years before that thankfully have been healed at this point, are I rage at authority, it's the ODD. But these symptoms were meant to break the very systems that made them disorders in the first place. BPD taught me to reject really, really unhealthy levels of codependency. It broke bonds that needed to be broken. And it also had me hold out for ones that were meant to be. And to help me smell manipulation like smoke. And to walk away when something doesn't align. That's the paradox. Your defenses save you until they starve you. And your symptoms might be ancient wisdom and a prison you outgrow. So if you can invite the mysticism in, if you can release each diagnosis and symptom from its cage, and then you yourself from the cage that each one puts you in, your freedom is infinite. Your freedom is ones that we really have yet to know as a human species, because we are so convoluted with diagnoses and all of these things that are wrong with us and all of these things that are wrong with our society. But there is so much mystic and gratitude and amazing things that are also right with us and right with our society and right with humanity and right with who we are as the spiritual beings having these human experiences. So you know what I've learned? Dissecting these symptoms matters, because when we don't, they start running the show. We are giving them full control. And it's almost programming on a whole nother level, right? Like we're receiving these diagnoses and we're saying, okay, yeah, I've got that diagnosis. And then we're kind of becoming lemons of a mental health epidemic instead of being like, okay, what diagnoses do you think I have? Okay, what are the symptoms? Let's break them down. Let's see which ones I actually have. Let's see which ones I feel called to work on first and work our way through those. And one of the cruelest patterns that I've seen, especially in my own life, is how these diagnoses can breed isolation disguised as survival. We start building identities around the wound, and suddenly we're at war with the world. We hate the cop because he pulled us over for going 90. We hate the judge mandating drug screens because we've lost ourselves in the wrong way of how to get high. We let people in just enough and then find a million reasons to burn the bridge and burn it so fiery and so finally because we fear the shame and guilt of ever wanting to return. It's not just a fear of abandonment anymore. It's a fear of our own vulnerability, a fear of the part of us that still wants to be held, that still wants love, and that still believes people might be worth trusting again. And if we don't slow down and start sorting through these symptoms piece by piece, not to fix ourselves, but to understand ourselves, we stay locked in this loop of burning everything down and wondering why we're always cold. That's why this conversation matters. And guys, I'm just going to take a brief break in recording. My partner is home for the evening, so I will pick this episode. So if there's a different tone on the other half of the episode or anything like that, then that explains it. All right. Brief interlude there. Time hopped a little bit. Entered into a new day. Appreciate your patience. Just so I skipped a beat, but obviously you didn't because you guys are in the middle of the podcast. So we're just going to pick right up where we left off, which is really all about the diagnosis as a cultural symptom, a broken system that we want to expose. And so this pertains to speaking into something that I've been feeling deeply in my bones for a very long time. And I'm sure that you probably have too. And if not, then maybe you will soon. Or again, if it doesn't resonate, it doesn't resonate. No big deal. The rampant uptick in diagnoses, especially over the past decades, isn't just about better mental health awareness. I believe that we could argue that it's the perspective that there is proof that we've been living in a way that no longer serves our soul. While governments, economies, and societal systems were busy engineering progress in industrial growth, capitalism, consumerism, digital advancement, they did so at the expense of our nervous system and our mental health, right? Kind of actually creating all of these diseases and these disorders, as well as not being really educational in emotional literacy and what emotions mean, how powerful they are, what certain ones can lead to, how not to harbor them, how to release them, things like that. And, at the expense of our spiritual sovereignty. Now, no one can ever take your spiritual sovereignty away from you. However, I do think it gets buried and forgotten about because it's not really spoken of. And that's why the age of Aquarius has stepped into our limelight, right? Is to bring about the invocation of the spiritual sovereignty from the depths of its cataclysmic sleep, right? We're just kind of tearing the earth wide open and coming out of it to bring new awareness and new understanding and knowledge and wisdom and love and this purity of knowing that is irrevocable. And so this broken system we were conditioned to adapt to was never really made for wholeness. It creates separation on so many different levels. Separation from each other, separation internally, right? Shame, rejection, accolades. Like, everybody has their place, right? No one is better than another. Sorry, in my head, it's like the janitor is not better than the millionaire and the millionaire is not better than the janitor. And we can say this all day long, but to really embody it and to really understand it is how we find ourselves and our awareness of where we are in the spiritual hierarchy. And the reality of it is like we need to turn hierarchy into a paradox, right? We need to kind of, and you can change the vibration of a word if it's a conscious consensus. You know what I mean? If more people kind of get involved, you can change what hierarchy like really stigmatizes and turn it into a spiritual understanding that everybody just has their place, and that the hierarchy is just an outline of okay, so like this way, like your heart keeps your entire body pumping, right? But yet there are other organs that you can live without. And so is that saying that the heart is better than the other organs? It's not. The other organs still have a pivotal job, even if they get removed. I've had an organ removed from my body. It's energetically still there, but the physical organ is gone. Multiple organs, actually, now that I think about it. And they're gone, right? And I can still live, but it doesn't mean that those organs were necessarily inadequate compared to my heart. They did their job. They served me and got me to where I needed to be, and the physical component of them I needed to release. And so it's kind of like that, right? Like we don't necessarily need every part of our body, obviously, after saying that, but we have all of these parts of our body. However, we don't necessarily put them in some hierarchy order, right? We don't put our lymph nodes above our skin or our skin above our brain. Maybe scientists do on some level, right? I'm not really into that, like in that depth. So I'm sure that they have some type of organized order of maybe what's the most important and what isn't. But in a normal everyday thinking, that would be, in my perspective, a really good comparison to draw in, because my heart is important. Yes. But I mean, if you ask me, my gut brain is my most important. Like my stomach, my gut brain down there is my most important compared to my heart and my head. But everybody has a different perspective. And so therefore, like what is one person's version of what like esteemed hierarchy would be is a different person's version, right? Like, so we have people awakening right now, and they are anchoring this consciousness in. And then we will also have people that awaken last, and they are still anchoring it in just a pivotal way, right? Like they're bringing up the anchor. And then what about all the people in the middle, right? Like they're connecting us to the beginning and to the end, to where we want to be and to getting to where we want to go. And there is no one that is more important than the other. So we were conditioned to adapt to systems that were never made for our wholeness, right? And those adaptations became the disorders. However, here's the deeper truth. This didn't happen because of some outside enemy. Every lineage, every family system, every soul group has played a part. We have all contributed, willingly or unknowingly, to how we got here. Whether it's one side, the other side, or both sides of the coin. And there is deep, 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 deep reverence to be found in this. Because now we are in one of the most pivotal turning points in human evolution, where we stop playing the blame game and we start holding ourselves accountable for our own spiritual prophecy, our own spiritual sovereignty, and what we can do to transform the world around us. We are starting to awaken, not just to our traumas, also to our accomplishments, to the gifts of survival, to the wisdom we gained through dysfunction. We are learning to be grateful for where we've been, acknowledging that it served us and our ancestors in many ways, while also standing with full authority and saying, absolutely no more. That doesn't work for me anymore, and I'm not going to have it, and I'm going to pave a new way, and I'm going to be different, and actually pursuing that. No more being ruled by systems that profit from our pain. No more normalizing polarization, disconnection, and fear. And no more betraying the body, the spirit, the feminine, the wild, or even the masculine. Because freedom is remembering who we are beneath all the programming. And this remembering, it is happening now. In you, in me, in all of us. And so what I want to invite us into now is just a listener activation about choosing one survival strategy that really screams louder than the rest, right? Like this is a sacred negotiation with the self. So what I want you to do is if you have a minute, choose one survival strategy. One part of you that felt like a symptom or a saboteur. It doesn't have to be from BPD or ODD. It can be from anything or whatever your higher self brings into your awareness. Maybe it's rage, emotional detachment, fear of love. Maybe it's the voice that whispers, push them away before they leave. And I want you to close your eyes and place a hand over your heart or wherever this part lives in your body. And when you find it, I want you to speak this truth aloud. I see you. I know you were trying to protect me. You kept me safe when no one else could. Thank you. And let that land. You're not dismissing this part. You are dignifying it, allowing it to feel seen. And now, ask the part gently but honestly, do I still need you to survive? Or are you still here because I forgot to give you a new role? And if you need to, pause here because we don't want you to rush the answer. We want you to allow it to speak to you, not from your head, but from the body, from a knowing, from your gut, your bones, your breath. And maybe it says, yes, I'm still guarding the door. Or maybe it softens and says, I've just been waiting to be reassigned. Or maybe it doesn't say anything at all because you're just prodding it slowly out. And it'll follow suit here after the episode sometime. Either way, there is no shame here. Only information, knowledge, and awareness. And so if your protector, this part, is ready to evolve, ask it what it wants to be. Give it a new job. Allow it to transform within you. This is the beginning of sovereignty.
This is where rage becomes your sword of boundary, and abandonment and fear becomes discernment, the ability to stay rooted even when it's uncomfortable. Defiance transforms into sovereignty, not a reaction, but a conscious, clear choice. It is recommended to choose one way to practice this in your real life this week. Say the hard truth, hold the line, and show up anyway. And if you wobble, good. That means you are rebuilding from truth, not performance. And if you'd like to, feel free, when you have a space or a time, light a candle and speak this new role aloud. The transformation of this part. Announce it, write it, bless it, embody it. Make it sacred because that's exactly what it is. This is what transmutation looks like. Not erasing your symptoms, evolving them into power. And you are not betraying your past self. You are giving them a place in your future. So as we close out, I'd like for you to take a minute to place a hand on your heart and say, my chaos is not my enemy. My defiance is not my flaw. And my loneliness is not my failure. And then ask, what if my disorder or dis-ease is my spirit's loudest prayer for freedom? Allow that to land with no answers needed and just witness. And if no one's told you today, you are not lost, you are in orbit. And even through the fragmentation, rebellion, or grief, you are still encoded with your original divine template. The you that existed before the trauma, the split, the storm. And they are still waiting to be remembered. You are waiting to be remembered. I really appreciate anybody that made it to the end of this episode. I feel it was very fractalized without being able to see the whole. I'm in this transitional phase right now of switching from hermetically speaking to a spiritual podcast, which is kind of, if you take a sphere and you kind of shatter in it and it kind of goes outwards and you can see all the pieces of it, that's kind of how I feel where I am right now. And I'm trying to reorganize and recalibrate. And I know good things are to come. However, I just feel very disheveled in these moments, and I'm excited for what's to come. And I hope you guys are too, because it's going to be amazing. So again, thank you for being here. You guys are amazing. Keep walking your path. I feel a shift also, I should say, I don't know what's going to pan out, but a shift in the meditations and the energy therapy sessions. I think that having them for every single episode is putting a little bit of rigidality on the podcast. And so it's really going to be which ones are called to. So throughout the week, I will still be releasing different content on the YouTube channel. However, it might not always be a perfect, or at least the match, as in like forcing each session to have a guided meditation and an energy therapy session. I have found myself in this breakaway chaos moment that like I think I have 2 energy therapy sessions for episode 23. And, you know, my mind is just, it's trying to organize all of it while also being kind of getting rid of the chaos, and they're kind of intertwining. And so I'm just trying to follow my intuition and see where it takes us. There still will be plenty of content. There will still be energy therapy sessions. There will still be guided meditations. Eventually I will start posting readings. There will be deep clearing protocols, drive time affirmations, right? We're just going to keep expanding, just as our spiritual worlds do. And so I will be here to help your pathway along that with the content that I put out. However, if I do meditations or things that are called to the session, of course, I will announce those in the session, pair them with them, or put them directly, in the podcast, or put them directly at the end of the podcast as well. I think that works well. It kind of keeps everything together. And so, yeah. All right, guys. Namaste, and many, many blessings on your way.